Hello, everyone, and thanks to the World Forum for Acoustic Ecology 2023. I am Juan Duarte, a researcher and sound media artist from Mexico, right now in Mexico City, based in Finland, normally to pursue my doctoral degree in arts. And from this position, I intend to study indigenous knowledge from an ecological perspective related to environmental sound, which considers the complex relationship across technologies and nature. And this presentation addresses the main aspects of a written article that is part of my current research, which unfolds around the notion of hybrid listening, following some of the perspectives of Hildegard Westerkamp on totems and Pauline Oliveros' proposal of using embodied technologies to expand our sensorium. These positions are considered to review the theme of the painting, The Song of the Talking Wire by Henry Farny. Moreover, this review is supportive for proposing the idea of hybrid listening. Lastly, the part on diversified technologies looks for alternative and culturally diversified ways for soundscape making. Hildegard Westerkamp and Pauline Oliveros as sound composers were led by the notions of ecology and utopia and approached soundscape recordings from a long tradition of technologized humanism. Their contributions enlighten the complex relation across soundscape technologies and indigenous listening. Hildegard Westerkamp and Pauline Oliveros had been deemed as sound practitioners who are in line with indigenous and ecological views. Westerkamp recognized the influence that the notions of sonic meditations and deep listening by Oliveros mark on her practice with soundscape making. For Pauline Oliveros, technologies are an object of study to aesthetically expand human sensorium and exploring machine spirituality and sound meditations. As with the notion of deep listening, Oliveros' idea of sonosphere runs deep in the atmosphere from the momentum of the Earth's spinning orbit in the sun's thermal influence and moves out through analogies and transductive intermediaries of acoustical and electromagnetic fields and waves. For Westerkamp, totem poles stand silently listening to the forest, ocean, wind, and rain, to ravens and frogs and eagles, listening to everything they are telling us about, made of the materials their surroundings are made of, their surrounding collected in them and brought to new expressions in their large silent structure. Each totem pole is an acoustic event for those who want to hear, for those who listen to its voices and the stories it has to tell. The term totem originates from the Ojibwa word ototeman, meaning one's brother or sister kin. Totems are considered to reflect the identity of creating human kinship with nature, and compared to magic, totemism underlines the feeling of unity and identification with an animal, while imitating it, a habit that leads to a continuing identification. Westerkamp has claimed that indigenous presence, as well as totems, were marginalized from the Canadian societal landscape, despite having endured the destruction of their environments, language, and cultural expression for generations. They continue to carry deep-seated knowledge of how best to live in a respectful relationship with the natural environment, its seasons, its cycles, and rhythms. How to live in an atmosphere of mutual give and take. For Westerkamp, totems have been displaced into the acoustically oppressive environment of the museums. From here, I'm interested to review a painting by the French artist Henry François Farny, who in early 20th century worked on the series portraying indigenous people from North America in everyday scenes. Interpreting this series of painting evokes different ideas. One could look at the emerging transmission infrastructures like the telegraph and trains as catalyzers of the Western modern technologies, clashing with indigenous spaces like totems. In that sense, media theorist Nicole Starosielski deems Western advancements of the telegraph line as a medium for expanding colonial control in the signal traffic. Another view on this image reminds us how the listening and worldly soundscape changes with industrialization, modern technological developments, and innovations. The Song of the Talking Wire presents a hunter holding a rifle and leaning on a telegraph post in the background, we see two horses, one of them carrying 2 hunted deers, and the other standing by with a mounting chair. The title of the painting suggests an animistic event across contrasting cultures and listening positions. It also refers to an aesthetic experience via the personification of the telegraph moving wires across long distances in the landscape. The singing of the wires might have come from the humming noise that these long strings produce as a type of aeolian sound. The hunter listens attentively to a soundscape intervened by technologies, atmospheric dynamics, or is perhaps spiritually immersed in a ritual for hunting in this landscape. Media theorist John Durham Peters considers the telegraph as a medium of communication combining the physical phenomena long observed in nature, speedy immaterial processes, with an old social practice, writing to distant correspondents. As a consequence, the telegraph contributed to the disappearance of the spiritual quest for messages at the cost of reducing the idea of communication into intentional sendings among humans. Information infrastructures like the telegraph and the train transformed radically the soundscape at that time. One could think of information technologies as being expansive and driven by the control of nature, but also experiencing these technologies as the indigenous man of the painting could provide a place for attentive listening at the wooden post. A medium that was formerly intended for transmitting human messages becomes repurposed as an atmospheric sound embodiment medium, with resonant links to the sensorial and spiritual fellowship with nature. My proposal on hybrid listening started by focusing on this kind of wind-driven soundscapes, combining embodied and techno-mediated listening, and recently including diversified and non-extractive approaches to nature. The diversification of environmental sound technologies represent an agency which emerges from the discordance between Western technologies and ancient cosmologies. The sound produced from oscillating telegraph lines is perhaps one of an augmented kind produced through the extension of the telegraph network. This kind of atmospheric listening moves from aural into haptic senses, resonating with the landscape. Henry David Thoreau, describing Walden, an aeolian harp sound found at the wind currents moving telegraphic wire lines. Timothy Morton refers to the aeolian harp as a metaphor for the idea of ambient poetics, where such atmospheric dynamics create a planetary scale sound. It can be argued that the listening position from the man of the painting underlines an alternative appropriation of Western technologies through spiritual totemism as an embodiment of the natural surroundings. Therefore, hybrid listening looks into the potential for embodied and mediated attunements to the soundscape of the atmosphere, motivated by ancestral knowledge on meteorology and weather folklore as a configuration axis of technological making, implementing ubiquitous and embodied environmental sound systems inspired by the deep time of weather technologies. In this image, we can see some of the initiatives my research is working on with environmental sound technologies. Sensing our atmosphere from hybrid listening means to research tools and objects in combination with embodied methods to reveal a sonic experience traced by meanings and narratives in the company of science to orient the study of atmospheric processes. Following Westerkamp and Oliveros' approach to technology, it is encouraged to look for alternative and diversified ways to negotiate across the embodied and technological mediations with sound. One could also look into other culturally situated manifestations of technology, such as in Global South, that resist the adoption of Western technologies, recognizing indigenous inspired technologies, such as wearable electronics, computing interfaces for sound making. Kate Galloway highlights creative uses of environmental sound, including sonification, installation, soundscape compositions, and other practices such as multi-channel and ambisonics. For Dylan Robinson, when soundscape practitioners approach indigenous listening, it is essential a critical positionality, which in absence risks to fall under cultural appropriation, and perhaps also to what Kate Galloway terms as sonic extraction, implicating a complex negotiation of soundscape practitioners with ethical matters regarding material and symbolic terms. For that reason, it is worth looking at the idea of diversified technologies to focus on the initiatives that emerge from a specific sociocultural context outside Western modernity. As proposed by the philosopher of technology, Juk Hui, he points to looking into art and scientific experiments that could reveal a new sensorium beyond the utilitarian manifestations of technology. Today, we could read the image of the Song of the Talking Wire as an allegory between the turbulent clashing of indigenous cosmovision and the modern infrastructures, unique approaches to totemic soundscapes, and even a hint of subversive appropriations of technologies. Therefore, this article proposes parallels across hybrid listening and diversified technologies, which can contribute to resisting the extractivist and deterministic renderings of creating soundscapes. And with that, I would like to thank you again for the opportunity to present my artistic research. And now I'm really eager to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah, come on up. Thank you, Juan. One moment.
Thank you.
Fascinating what you just presented to us, and there's so much more you could say. I was wondering about the artistic side of the totems, because they're visual representations, and Hildegard and others have said that they're actually stories incorporated in that sculpture. Could you talk more about that? How does one relate to the sound of a visual object like a totem?
Thank you for your question. Well, I get this kind of vision of Westerkamp on thinking about the relation of the materiality of the totems in relation to their surrounding soundscape in terms of this kinship with animals or with other manifestations of nature. But I believe also there's this this culturally mediated listening, which is built upon the cosmovision and beliefs and so on, which are also creating a position for listening. And in that sense, I think I would be very interested to see what other presenters are working on, this positionality of listening, which is something that I see that there's already kind of like a trend or an interest to define this more in clear terms. But as for myself, I think I rely mostly on this materiality in terms of thinking of totems as a medium for creating a position for listening. But I don't know if I could answer your question, but I think I find it interesting also to think about this more in detail. Thank you.
Can you tell us more about indigenous sonic encounters with telegraph and long wires? Is there oral history on this subject, and one kind of knowledge they acquire from it?
Absolutely. I think I found this painting of the Song of the Talking Wire from a book of Douglas Ken called Earth Sound Signal, and there's a couple of other narratives related to this event of indigenous listening to these telegraph lines. And I remember there's another account of I believe it's a Brazilian native community, which in this clash with these technologies, there was some sort of like kind of relation with the insects, saying it's called the telegraph noise, I believe. It's a signal that it's pretty much accumulating as a buzzing, and sort of there was this kind of like kind of interpretation also of animality within the telegraphs. What else could be? Well, but I think maybe I didn't mention the account of Henry David Thoreau, which is describing more clearly this telegraph harp sound or sort of. So I think it would be interesting to find more indigenous accounts of this, but so far those are the ones I'm thinking of right now.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. I was in Vancouver 2 years ago and actually working also on similar issue with Candice Campo, who was one of the representatives from the native community of Coast Salish people. And I was trying to make a comparison between, the use of cedar tree wood in carving totem poles and use of cedar trees in, the infrastructure of utility poles in Vancouver, which is one of the most kind of densely populated in terms of the number of those utility poles. I think you have 800,000 of them in British Columbia. And I was interested in the notion of circularity because, as you probably know, the totem poles, they have this very interesting circularity to their lifespan. And once they are no longer, serving their kind of cultural purpose, they are being brought back to the forest, for instance, to kind of nurture other ecosystems in a way. And from my investigation, it seemed like the use of cedar trees in the utility pole industry and distribution of electricity is totally different, and oftentimes those tree logs are being just discarded and treated as trash in a way. So that was kind of an interesting aspect, and I was wondering if in your research you are also touching upon that, the kind of epistemological approach to wood as a kind of cultural material. Or kind of a mediator of cultural content in a way, and how it's being treated beyond its kind of utilitarian, function in a society. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. It's really great. I don't think I have grasped yet that aspect of the circularity of materials of totems yet. Been working previously mostly on the aspect of the wind and the atmospheric sort of themes or energies so far. I think this aspect of the totems came up really through the interaction with the with this topic of the Aeolian telegraph, so this sound that creates based on the oscillation of the wires, but also they were used as perhaps as kind of sensors as well to when the early radio was developed. So just to make it very clear, I haven't really grasped that part of the wooden materiality, and I found it really interesting, and I thank you for pointing that out. I think definitely there's always a story to tell about these mediums, and they should not be taken for granted, and there's so much to explore within these connections between nature, technology, and nature that can be revealed as you're pointing out. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Juan. Thank you so much for your presentation. We really appreciate you.